Let's go ahead and reconvene. Thank you all very much for that break, and I apologize. In the future, I'll try and do those at the 2-hour point. But we still are on item, forgive me, I'm losing track here. Item 8. Yes, I haven't checked that one off yet. Fiscal year budget, operating budget. Mr. Habashi, go ahead.
I think the next presentation is Rob. I'm sorry. Here, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Habashi, Chair Byron. I'll try to be brief. In the General Counsel's office, our goal is to make sure that all of the operations here can do their job. We want to give the confidence to the boards, to the council, to the staff, and to the public that the actions that are being taken are going to be enforceable, defensible, and ultimately compliant. So that's what we do. And our budget is fairly modest. Part of that is because we very conveniently put some of the cost into Tiffany's budget in terms of resources like computer softwares and things. But nonetheless, I got a little excited there. Our budget comprises of some outside legal service contracts. We have regulatory advice. There's a law firm, and that contract is about $100,000. It represents, in a comparable term, it would be a $20,000 reduction over last year, and part of that is because we've added staff. Mr. Keene and I are both now full-time on board, so there's been a modest reduction there, but we are very busy in front of the CPUC, along with the Cal CCA in terms of representing Monterey Bay Community Power. The other component of the outside council budget is for power purchase agreement and project development activities. That's very specialized. Those contracts and confirmations are very time intensive. It takes a long time to negotiate those, and while I come up to speed, we'll continue to rely on outside counsel to be able to help us in those, and that's stayed steady from last year. The other component of our budget is for the legislative advocacy services that we have. Keep in mind that we do contribute to Cal CCA as part of our dues. Cal CCA does a lot of advocacy on behalf of us and other CCAs, but we do have our own lobbyist, and next year we're budgeting $60,000 to be able to do that on our behalf. Again, that represents a decrease of about $30,000 from last year's budget, and it by no means should signify a reduction in the work that he'll be doing and that we'll be doing there. But again, with some expanded staff here and bringing on, hopefully, we have a vacant position for a regulatory analyst that will absorb some of the costs that we relied on outside services a year ago. I have two other slides here. I'll just touch on them briefly. And these accomplishments listed for the last fiscal year are really accomplishments of the rest of the staff and the boards at their direction. We've just done what we can within the General Counsel's office to ensure that the staff is supported. And looking forward to next year, we want to continue doing that. That's the story. We're an internal service department. Their successes are ours. We serve at the pleasure of the executive officer, and his direction is ours. So I'll take any questions.
Please, Mr. Kimball.
Just a quick one. You mentioned that the legislative advocacy was in addition to the work with Cal CCA, but I didn't see Cal CCA listed in the legal budget. So is that captured somewhere else, or where is that?
Yeah, the Cal CCA budget, I believe, is in the...
It's under general and administration expenses.
And that's because Cal CCA does a great deal more than just supporting our legislative and regulatory activities. They do a lot for, as an industry kind of umbrella on behalf of all of the CCAs. But our dues, calculated as a portion, I think, of the various members, and $360,000 roughly is what our contribution in dues is for the next fiscal year.
Any other comments on this aspect of the budget, legal department? Okay, thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Tiffany will share all the numbers with us now.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to share our proposed budget for 2019-2020 with all of you. On July 25th, we provided an oral presentation reviewing our draft 2019-2020 operating budget to the Audit and Finance Committee. The committee supported forwarding our budget recommendations to the Operations Board for further recommendation to the Policy Board. The committee's feedback has been incorporated in our proposed budget to the Operations Board, which we shared with them yesterday. So yesterday, we shared the proposed budget to the Operations Board, and they supported our recommendation to the Policy Board. And then today, we are going to introduce our budget to you guys, and then also seek for your support to recommend our proposed budget to the Policy Board. And then on September 4th, we are going to submit our budget to the Policy Board for their approval and adoption. Our budget assumptions overview. We are using zero-based budgeting approach, which means all expenses must be justified. Budget is built around what is needed for the upcoming fiscal year. And then the goals for our strategic plan are used as our guide. The major goals from our strategic plan are to build a highly engaged team, to source affordable, reliable, and carbon-neutral electric service at predictable prices, establish we are a trustworthy resource that is responsive to customers' needs, ensure that we are financially viable and fiscally responsible, and to reduce regional greenhouse gas emission. Our future economic outlook. As shared with by Tom, at the current pace, we're expecting to reach the maximum reserve level, which is 75% of our operating expenses in the fiscal year 2020-2021. A shift in rate design will be recommended to the boards, generally abandon the current approach of charging identical rates to PG&E and SCE in 2021, with rebates given to the customers at the end of the year, and adopting a cost-plus approach. The rate setting process will ensure that our rate designs are competitive with PG&E and SCE in 2021 for each customer class.
Wow, those are big statements. Thank you very much.
And then in October 2019, this year, we will hire a rate design consultant to help us to develop a long-term rate strategy to forecast our revenue requirements, reflect fair cost allocation to each customer class, and promote dynamic efficiency and innovation. Renovation. We also project to implement our own rates in early 2021. The second one is for the unifying Central Coast counties. As presented by Tom in the previous agenda items about our expansion philosophy and the inclusion of the new member agencies, the additions of these jurisdictions as member agencies will enlarge CCA's geographical footprint in California and expand our political influence of CalCCA in general. San Luis Obispo County is likely to become a major hub for developing and integrating new renewable resources in California, and having access to these resources will advance our goal of 100% carbon neutral resources. Our revenue assumptions. The primary source of our income is from the retail sales of electricity to 4 customer classes. 234,000 accounts are for the residential, 31,000 accounts are for commercial and industrial, 4,600 are for agricultural, and 2,200 are for street and traffic lights. Our average generation retail rate is about 8.4 cents per kilowatt hour, which matches PG&E rates minus the PCIA. Our revenue assumptions also including the enrollment of the cities of San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay in January 2020, and Arroyo Grande, Delray Oaks, Grover Beach, Paso Robles, and Pismo Beach in January 2021. Our generation rates will be increased by an average of 7.4%. And the PCIA will assume no changes starting from 2020, approximately 2.9 cents per kilowatt hour. And the total consumption will be about 3,245 gigawatt hour using our current enrollment rate of 96%. And the power supply rates will escalate by about 7.2% in fiscal year 2019 to 2020, and by 6% starting from 2021. Energy prices are hedged for about 92% of our expected consumption. This slide will illustrate the significant impact of PCIA over our revenue for fiscal year 2019 and 2020. We project that revenue is at $275 million, and PCIA will be projected at $93 million, which represent 25% of the total. We are growing, and our expansion into the counties of San Luis Obispo in 2020 and Santa Barbara in 2021 will require us to open a satellite office in either county. The focus of the satellite office staff will be on community engagements, account management, and energy programs implementation. We evaluated our current priorities and needs and recommend the addition of 7 full-time positions. 4 of them are for the Communication External Affairs Department. The first one is the Manager of Community Relations. For the past year, we relied on 2 energy public engagement associates to handle over 200 community engagement events presented to the governmental agencies, community groups, and businesses. The proposed position will allow for an organized approach to address community needs. And the second position is Energy Programs Analyst. In 2019, we have successfully launched 2 major energy programs with a growing list of potential programs to be deployed in fiscal year 2019-2020. The proposed position will provide crucial quantitative and qualitative skills to support the manager of energy programs in creating innovative programs and collecting feedback from our customers about how to best design programs across MBCP's 5 service areas. And the third new headcount would be for the Energy Accounts Analyst. For our account management service, we have been relied on limited staffing to handle this service, including serving our key customers since inception. The addition of this headcount will support the manager of energy account services to enhance our customer support and analytics to carry out our value proposition for our customers in the San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara jurisdictions, as well as portions of South Monterey County. The 4th new headcount would be for the Energy Marketing Specialist. With our growing service area, marketing continues to be a critical need at MBCP. This position will assist the manager of energy communications in events and sponsorship opportunities, as well as developing marketing materials and representing our brand at marketing events. And for the Internal Operations Department, we recommend an addition of 3 full-time headcounts. The first one is for the Finance Manager. With our planned expansion along the Central Coast, our current financial analyst will be assigned to handle the data management contract with 2 IOUs, PG&E and SCE. Therefore, we propose to add a finance manager position to support myself to manage the day-to-day financial operations, including budget development, treasury management, project expense tracking, financial reporting, internal controls, and other activities essential to our fiscal health. And the second new headcount for the Internal Operations Department is for the Manager of Strategic Analysis and Rates. As we're expecting to reach the maximum reserve level, which is 75% of our operating expenses in fiscal year 2020-2021, a shift in rate design will be recommended. This position will work closely with the data scientist to develop a long-term rate strategy and plan to forecast our revenue requirements and reflect fair cost allocation to each customer rate class. Also, this role will supervise the financial analyst in overseeing the data management contract, including future enrollments in 2020 and 2021, maintenance of MBCP rates, enhancements to the billing system, and timely delivering of accurate reporting. And the last proposed new headcount is the data scientist position. With our expansion plan along the Central Coast, we will manage and process usage, billing, and transactional information from over 500,000 meters and customers, with usage data in hourly and sub-hourly granularity. One of our major capital expenditures for fiscal year 2019-20 is to investigate and to build out our own analytic data management platform with open source technologies. Therefore, we propose to add this headcount with solid data science and coding skills in data mining. someone who can transform a large amount of structured and unstructured raw data into a usable format and analyze big data using advanced analytics tools, and are expected to have the research background to develop new algorithms for specific problems. The overall annual budgetary impact for adding the proposed 7 full-time headcounts is about $1.2 million, or 0.4% of revenue. And our total headcounts will then be increased to 32 full-time staff and 3 part-time staff. And then this is our proposed organization chart. For our operating expenses, data manager and PG&E services fees, we have contract with GridX to provide data management services, billing services, and call center operations. The data management fees are based on a fixed price per meter per month. For the service fees paid to PG&E consists of about 35 cents per account per month for the meter data posting services and for processing energy charges and customer payments. For professional and legal services, it includes day-to-day accounting services and the annual external audit services, HR, IT services, and a rate design consultant for the internal operations department. We have also budgeted for the consulting support for the power procurement and risk management support, microgrid consulting services, and the virtual power plant feasibility study. For marketing and outreach area, we have budgeted for the consulting support to assist with the annual reporting for the key accounts. And for legal, we have budgeted for negotiation support for long-term power supply procurement and regulatory advocacy. And for general administration expenses, it includes ordinary business expenses such as conferences and professional development, rent, liability insurance, office supplies, small equipment and software, copier lease and usage, travel, and business meals. And it also covers the CAC membership dues for the legislative and regulatory support. Overall, our non-power supply expenses is less than 5% of our total revenue. The key drivers are the data manager, call center services, and PG&E service fees, and they are estimated at about $3.9 million, or 1.5% of our revenue. For our capital investments, we will perform our due diligence to investigate the acquisition of land and construction of our headquarters in the Monterey Bay area. In the process of site selection, we will evaluate the following criteria that can affect the day-to-day business operations. The first one is the ordinances or zoning restrictions, infrastructure conditions such as roads, utilities, real estate availability and cost, our space needs, accessibility and parking, and then also the proximity to highways and other businesses and services, commute time for our employees and board of directors and the council members, and the accessibility to talent pool. We will also evaluate the potential for renting space or board facilities to the public agency and organizations with similar mission. And we will also investigate the acquisition of a customer resource management CRM and data analytics system for the analysis and collection of customer data and a portfolio management system for managing our energy portfolio. We also budget a vehicle purchase for staff use. We will establish a capital expenditure reserve once we know the estimated cost of all these capital expenditures. And to fulfill our key goals, which are to ensure fiscal stability, reduce customer rates, and invest in the local economy, we propose to fund programs at 2% of revenue, and then the remaining surplus will be allocated at 70% to reserves and 30% to rebates for fiscal year 2019 and 2020. We expect that our reserve balance will reach the maximum reserve level, which is 75% of our operating expenses in fiscal year 2020-2021. And at that time, we will shift in rate design and generally abandon the current approach of charging identical rates to PG&E with rebates given to our customers at the end of the year, and adopt a cost-plus rate design approach. Our current methodology used to calculate funding for programs, rebate, and reserve will be changed. Programs will be calculated as operating expenses, and rebates will be offered in the form of a discount incorporated into our generation rates. And then we will commission a technical study to determine the appropriate reserve level. This slide illustrates the budgeted program, rebate, and reserve for fiscal 2019 and 20. And then you can see that we set aside $5 million for programs, $19 million for rebates, which also equivalent to 6.8% of our revenue, and $43 million for reserve. And for the future 5 years, they are now based on the previous approach that surplus will be split 50-50 between programs and rebates once the reserve balance has reached to the maximum reserve level. But we are planning to work on the cost-plus scenario and to present it to the policy board in September. This chart displays the growth of our reserve balance compared to the projected revenue and surplus after rebates and programs. How is our budget compared to the other CCAs nearby? It is very clear that our budget is favorable in almost every expense category. For cost of energy per kilowatt hours, you can see that MPCP is at 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour, which is 6.6% lower than the average among the other 3 CCAs. And for programs expenses, we are about 130.7% higher than the other CCAs. To conclude, our proposed fiscal year 2019-2020 operating budget is balanced and presents we are in stable financial condition. Operating revenue is projected at $275.3 million and total expenditures of $232 million, projecting a surplus after rebates and programs of $43.3 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Law. Mr. Hibachi, you want to close? There's one more slide.
Yeah, I think now it's open for question.
All right. If you go to the next slide, number 44, you'll see what the recommendation is that we're being asked. I have to make a quick response comment. There's a great deal of information in here and a lot of answers to my questions. Thank you very much. And I hope other members feel the same way. There was a lot there to understand about what your thinking is. And once again, you're very open, Mr. Hibachi, in how you present this information to us. We understand this. It's all there, the assumptions, everything. It makes a lot of sense. I do not want to curtail any comments that council members have, however. So please, questions, Mr. Stedman?
Yeah, really quick, I'd just like to say that was a really excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Very good. Said it much more succinctly than I did. Still, any questions or comments? Mr. Kimball?
I'll echo Mr. Stedman's comment that was a great report. Thank you. I was just curious on that last comparison with other CCAs, how Monterey Bay Community Power stands next to Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
Actually, because Silicon Valley Clean Energy has the same fiscal year as us, so we don't have that information yet.
Yeah, we would have loved to get the information from all the other CCAs, but the other didn't have it or they were not willing to give it. We just got the ones that we're willing to offer. And I can tell you that from my chat with their CEO, I've asked him how much money does he have in reserves. Remember, they started that operation in April of 2017. We started out on March 2018. And he shared with me that their reserves have roughly now, at the end of this fiscal year, will be around $100 million. So with a year ahead of us, we pretty much have nearly the same amount of reserves that they do have. I think we're doing really well from just about every aspect of our operation, financially speaking. I don't want to say that we're doing better than anybody else on everything else. Definitely, that's not the case. Many of them are well ahead of us, and they are doing really very well on a number of things, but financially, I think we're probably ahead of everybody.
I just wanted to check one assumption with the shared bargaining that Monterey Bay is doing with Silicon Valley. Is their cost of power the same as ours?
It used to be, but not anymore. Theirs is just a little bit more expensive. Yeah, I think. Yeah, judging by some of the actions that I've seen him take in the last year or so.
You don't really know yet. You want to take the over-under bet on this, Mr. Boshian? Okay, any more questions? Mr. Groot?
Sure, I have a question and then maybe a comment. I think I heard earlier that you were planning on hiring a consultant that was going to help establish the cost-plus rates, and then you're also hiring a manager for cost or rate analysis. So I'm wondering how those two are going to work together, and are they hired at the same time? Or what's the connection there? And I apologize, it's getting close to my bedtime, so I may have missed that whole thing as you were going through it.
Let me see if I can help Tiffany. I think we're definitely going to kickstart the process with a consultant that will establish the basics for the rate design. And at the same time, we'll be out looking for a rate manager and perhaps hire the rate manager probably in early 2020 to kind of see the last work that will be done by the consultant. Once that takes place and we have new rates, then the rate manager will be the person that will be, from this point forward, changing and adjusting the rates as things change.
Okay, thank you, that helps. And then I would like to make a comment. I noticed in there that in the capital expenditure budget that you're going to be looking at land and possibly building a building or buying a building. And I just wanted to state that I've done that twice in prior lives, and it is very time consuming. It demands full-time attention. And with all the things that are going on here and all the expansion that this organization's doing, I hate to see that become a distraction and that we lose focus on the other items. So I just say that as a word of caution that it may sound good to pursue that, but in light of where we're at staffing-wise and all the other priorities that we have, I would hate to have that consume everyone's life because it does take over.
Yeah, rest assured, it's not a priority by any stretch of imagination. We're only about a year and a half young, and we still have a lot of work ahead of us. And while we eventually like to do this, it's not the top priority by any stretch, or even in the top three.
Mr. Osmer?
Yeah, what's a virtual power plant? Did I miss that?
Yeah.
Was I
Yeah.
No.
wasn't
He
familiar
did
with
go
that.
through it a little bit.
He
But-
missed that in engineering school.
Yeah,
that's-
but you know what?
I was absent that day.
Mr. Osmer, it's a new term for distributed energy resources and how you can own and control those assets and use them for other sources of revenue. But I think it's a pretty esoteric topic to get in on the financial report. But it's something that Mr.
Yeah,
Deitch.
it is taken.
It's
It's
okay.
taken
It's-
about 5, maybe 1,000 different sources of electricity generation and linking them virtually, then put them into the market.
As long as we all know that we don't know whether it's feasible or not, because we're going to do a study on it. I'm okay with that.
Yes.
It's definitely feasible.
Okay.
Yes.
So why are we doing a study on it? No, sorry. One just to comment is, I hope we can focus on local employment. In terms, and this is kind of an eternal battle in local government, is whether to hire a consultant or pay somebody to do it yourself, and I hope that we make that a consideration. And I certainly agree with Mr. Groot's assessment of looking for land and building, and especially just for the purpose of doing a reserve. You can ballpark the reserve. It's pretty easy. Thank you.
Good comments. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Escudo.
I just have a question. On the 5-year budget, is that including the San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara?
It includes a number. It certainly includes San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay. It also includes the 5 more cities that we have. The 4 cities from San Luis Obispo, as well as Del Rey Oaks here from Monterey, and for the policy board, we can also add the county of Santa Barbara.
So in this year you have 95 million on the reserve. That's pretty good.
Thank
That's
you.
good. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments, questions, Mr. Groot?
So I want to thank staff for all the work that went into this and the presentations. I think we learned a lot tonight, and I appreciate the book that you put together for all of us. It was very helpful going through that before the meeting here. And with that, I will move the recommendation of staff to approve the fiscal year budget for 2019 and 2020.
I would like to second it.
I'm noticing a trend. Mr. Groot seems to move the items, doesn't he?
He's seizing the day.
Mr. O'Rourke.
I have a brief yes/no questions and then a quick comment. So what I got from the presentation, which also was fantastic, everybody else nailed it. That was great. The cost plus, transition to cost plus, are we to assume that you want to transition to that in fiscal year 2021?
We would like to start the new rate structure for 2021. Yes.
Okay. And then in the capital investments, did you all budget for a satellite office or no?
Yes, we do.
You did? Okay. And then my quick comment is the graph of the rebates, programs, and reserves is wonderful. But as we said, if we're going to switch to cost plus, that'll likely upend that. And I think it's a high priority for my constituents and also for the policymakers in San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay to be fully appraised of and a part of that conversation and that development, how that goes. So we're looking forward to being close with you guys on that one.
Okay, I'm going to open it to public comment. We're on item 8, staff. The recommendation to the Policy Board of Directors to approve the fiscal year operating budget. Any public comments, please?
Good evening again. Piet Cannon from Ecology Action. And I want to commend Monterey Community Power for all the work in a year and a half. It's pretty amazing.
It is.
To see what's been going on. That's guess why the meetings run late, because there's so much to cover. But also just looking back in a very simple view of it, I mean, there's a lot of complex issues, but to be able to be a consumer of electricity and in Santa Cruz County and have carbon-free electricity, that's great, and to see that that's being provided for the region and going to expand too. I think that's a really commendable goal as that goes through. So and then I specifically want to talk in terms of the budget, in terms of the program area. So and it's nice to have that extra amount of funds to be able to make programs happen that also further the goal of reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And from Ecology Action's perspective, we have a similar goal in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also supporting local economic vitality. So, and I just want to commend the staff for securing the CEC grant to do the EV infrastructure and the networks, and then looking into next year. Obviously, that's when the program is going to be implemented, coming up the end of 2019, and to look at also or keep the door open for multi-unit dwellings where maybe a right-size technology might be, instead of a DC fast charger or a level 2 charger, a level 1 charger might solve some of the problems of making sure that the 20% of people currently in the community powers region, I know that region is going to grow pretty quickly here, who live in apartment complexes have access to charging. So something to consider for next year as you go over the program discussion. And then also in terms of the electric car rebate, it's good to hear that electric car rebate generated a lot of interest, and maybe people didn't use the coupon, but they bought electric cars over the hill because of the price competition there, but to keep that going too, because that's a great way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through more people driving electric cars. So commend you there for doing that and continuing in next fiscal year budget. And then also for another right-sized technology, also consider maybe a electric bike incentive program where you provide a rebate and education to people for using that technology for electric bike, because many of our trips are 3 to 5 miles, and you can do that on a bicycle, and you can do that even better on an electric bicycle. So something to consider, and I know that some people think that electric bikes, they're only replacing bicycle trip miles, regular bicycle trip miles, but recent survey and data has shown that a lot of electric bike trips replace car trips. So it is something that does have an impact on reducing vehicle emissions from the cars driving around our community. Good. So, and then, let's see, just want to close. I think those are the main points. So thanks for looking, those programs and considering other program options for next fiscal year.
Thank you for your comment. Again, we're looking for comments on this item in particular, the operating budget.
Yeah, Michael Sain again with Campaign for Sustainable Transportation. I'd like to go into the energy programs, back to that point. And first of all, I'd like to thank Council Member O'Rourke for revisiting the feeling that things were being rubber stamped. I appreciate that. And not only do we need a list of programs from staff and Mr. Habashi, but I think we could maybe also get a menu from the community. And so I'd like to also thank Co-Chair Levan for bringing up the idea to talk to your constituents. I really emphasize that. I've been talking to the ones I work with pretty much all last year. So I'd like to go a little more specific to my representatives on this one, which is Chair Levan, Council Member Bueno de Bosque, Council Member Kimball, and Osmar. They're all Santa Cruz County, and that's where I am, and that's where Piet is. And I was bringing another person today too, but he couldn't make it. So if you want to take your pencils out, here's a few programs really quickly. We all know that I'm really big on electrification of Metro as a program or a grant. I support Ecology Action and Piet's electric bike rebate program as well. That'd be also Santa Cruz County. And we were going to have a gentleman come today, Bob Morgan. It's kind of an inexpensive program. I think it's a good one. And he's trying to get a no idling signs and stuff put around schools. And he's specifically going to start at Cabrillo College. And it would be, he said, relatively inexpensive, but it was just for materials and workmanship. And he wanted to come tonight, so I told him I would mention it to you also. So those are 3 programs right there off the bat. So, but keep at it, and hopefully we get more input from the community and from the other constituents too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments on item 8? All right. I think we're moving to a vote. Again, we have first and second, and this is to endorse item 8. I think we can go with a voice vote on this one. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Very good. Ms. Law and everyone else here that presented on the budget, thank you. It was lengthy, but very informative, and obviously we appreciate the opportunity to see it.
Thank you.
As soon as it's available. Each year. Thank you. And what a stellar budget. It really is. Great. I have to add one more comment. It really is indicative of how well managed this organization is and how hard everybody works, that you can see these numbers and how well you're coming in compared to your peers. It's just excellent.
Just plenty of kudos goes to Tiffany and her staff.
Yes. Okay, thank you all very much. Moving, we're just rolling along here. On item 9, and this is an oral report. Receive oral report and support staff's recommendation on an advocacy policy and procedures to the Operations Board for further support. I'd like to thank the staff for bringing this to our attention. I think this is in response to comments from last month's meeting, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you very much. Mr. Hibashi?
Excuse me, Rob is going to be presenting this item.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if you could indulge me before we start. Is there some urgency to this, or has this been reviewed by the Policy or Operations Board?
No, I think this is in response to our request. Go right ahead, Mr. Shaw.
And I just wanted to say I had a bunch of questions about this, and due to the late hour, maybe we could put it off till the next meeting. So you might consider that.
So I'm just looking around. I'd like to move forward. I mean, you're just putting off the inevitable. I'm sure we'll have a full agenda next month as well. Let's hear the presentation and think about it if you want to continue. But is it a very long presentation?
Well, I haven't given it yet, but I believe I can deliver it timely.
So I hear what you're saying, but I'm not inclined to take it off the agenda or postpone it at this point, except for the fact that we're pretty much, the fiscal year is over. I'm sorry, the fiscal year, the legislative year is pretty much over. You've done an excellent job of quashing most bills. There's only like one or two that are outstanding that I know you're still following closely. It's been a stellar year of wins for CCA in general and for MBCP. I'm still inclined to go forward with it because it's going to take a couple of months to get this. I don't know. Are we going to? Let's hear the presentation, and if you all want to shut this down, we'll shut it down, okay? But I think we'll just take a few minutes and hear the presentation. I appreciate your trying to keep us moving.
Thank you, Chair Byron. Where I'll start is to give you a sense of where this came from and where it's going and what the timeline really is. So where this came from at the June council meeting, we talked about the need to start organizing some of our legislative and advocacy policies. And then really the goal is to organize our approach at all levels, whether it's at state, federal, or at the regulatory area. And then we also need to, I think, give some direction to staff so staff knows where they're within bounds in terms of their advocacy at these various levels, especially given the timelines that the legislative advocacy approach is. And to communicate our policy directions outwardly so that other organizations know where we stand on particular issues, at least at a high level. So we're really talking about high-level policy direction to give staff some parameters for where they need to go. The timeline for this, we went from kind of a discussion. I mentioned that I would bring it back, so here we are, and I want to get the feedback that Councilmember Osmer is alluding to. So the timeline is such that I want to give you something to chew on, hear your feedback, incorporate that so that it will be presented to the Operations Board. Their next meeting is in October. And do the same thing at that level. Hear the feedback, incorporate that information before presenting it to the Policy Board as part of their December decision. And that's the real deadline in my mind. I want the Policy Board to be able to take action in December so that when the legislative session kicks off in 2020, we're really well prepared to be able to do that. Since our last meeting, my activities have been reaching out to CalCCA, looking at their legislative and advocacy policy, looking at other CCAs across the PGE area, looking at some of our member agencies to the extent that they've published a legislative advocacy policy. I've reached out to the California Alliance for Community Energy and looked at their mission statement and advocacy positions, as well as the Center for Climate Protection and their mission center. I took all of that information and came up with sort of an idea list. I then worked internally with staff and with Mr. Hibashi. We had a number of conversations, sometimes impassioned, to come up with what our policy guidelines would be. And the way that we've structured this is to ground it on the foundations that are in our JPA. Our JPA sets out certain purposes that spell out what this organization is supposed to be doing. So it's grounded in those purposes. Those purposes really give us some core principles. And then I've I don't have a slide on this, but I have some core kind of guiding principles as well that I think should just oversee our policies. From these foundations, I've pulled out some key issues that are really impacting CCAs and MBCP in particular, and come up with some guiding policy positions that will help guide the positions we'll take through the next legislative session. So here, what you see, I mean, essentially what this slide is saying, that what we're doing as Monterey Bay Community Power is that we're decreasing greenhouse gas emissions by electrifying our energy uses, making it more affordable to our customers, building and sustaining a local community, and promoting stable and reliable grid through the local control of energy procurement and energy resources in addition to procurement. So those two functions. It does represent, I think, a little bit of a move forward from where the original JPA was, because it's not about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by reducing overall energy consumption. We are increasing electric energy consumption, but by doing so, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And part of that comes from generation sources. The old thinking was that generation sources are dirty, so you reduce your use of electricity. This is moving forward and saying we have clean generation opportunities, let's move forward. And that's really, SB 100 has kind of defined that for all load-serving entities as to where we're going over the next 25 years.
That's the 100% renewable.
That's right. Guiding principles, again, I don't have a slide on this, but for me, there's just who we are. And some of this is from the feedback of the discussion we already had at our last meeting, which is we want to be collaborative. So we want to be actively collaborating with like-minded organizations. On the regulatory side, we're already doing that. We're meeting on a bi-weekly basis with the National Resources Defense Council and the Sierra Club, trying to address some issues. We're going to be more proactive in doing that with local advocacy groups. Cal CCA will be building that as well. Part of that is to maintain a dialogue, make sure that they're educated on where we are on positions, hear their concerns about certain positions, and then being able to control or eliminate any kind of confusion that state representatives and policy decision makers may have when there are differences potentially between positions that we might take and positions that local advocacy groups may be taking. And then, the other component of being collaborative, and I thank Councilmember Stedman for his recommendation at the last meeting, which is reaching out to our member agencies as well as like-minded governmental organizations like MBARD, and finding opportunities to really work on issues together. Separate from collaboration, being solution-oriented. Our goal is not necessarily, we have to be able to deliver power, we have to have a reliable grid. These are very complex issues. They're very meaty, they deserve a lot of attention. We want to be solution-oriented in the positions that we're taking forward. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily getting away from these core foundation issues, but we want to be solution-oriented in how we approach them. And the last one is, and this is just who we are and what we believe in, we're going to be ethical. We're going to respect the positions of people that may not agree with us. We're going to investigate them fully. We may disagree, but as Thomas Jefferson said, when reasonable men resort to war, let's remember that we're just friends and brave enemies. So if it comes to that, we will do so ethically. So looking at greenhouse gas emissions and reducing them, really the key issue here is that SB 100 has really set out a target for us. They've said that in 2045, we're going to be 100% zero carbon. And that's not just for us, that's all load-serving entities. So that's the IOUs as well. So the intermediate goals that have been set out, 50% by 2026, 60% by 2030 of renewable energies, those are, I think, largely accepted as being achievable. But the 2045, that's the challenge. That's what we need to make sure that we're moving forward to. And our goal is to meet or exceed that standard, which means our goal, obviously, how are you going to exceed 100% zero carbon? You're going to do it more timely. They've set a goal of 2045. Our goal is to do it sooner than that. And we're going to advocate on behalf of policies that will help us get there. Our approach needs to be through a mix of carbon-free generation technologies, and there are a lot out there, and I list some of them in the policy procedures. And in addition to just all of the different generation sources that might be carbon-free, I'm going to talk in a little bit about bridge technologies, really preserving that 2045, that 0% goal, because there may be opportunities or the necessity in the short run to have bridge resources that help preserve that goal of 0%. One of the fears, I think, of 0% in 2045 is what happens if the lights go out. If there's a failure of the grid between now and then, the detrimental effect of that goal and people saying, can we get there, is something that no CCA wants to have to bridge in real time, so we're planning for that and want to be prepared for that. And our approaches, some of them we talked about already. It'd be supporting policies that are going to help us move forward in this response. It's going to promote policies that expand CCAs, that enable CCAs to get started in areas that they're not already, and promoting the decarbonization for all customers, regardless of who their load servicing entity is. Moving forward to the competitive rates, really what we're looking at here in terms of structure and the issue that we're facing is that rates are impacted, as Chair Byron indicated earlier, they're a complex beast. You've got second-by-second demand and supply that need to be met over the grid. You've got the availability of resources in particular areas, and that may cause spikes in certain areas and not in others. And you have other factors that are going to influence that as well. And just as an aside, I think yesterday, Texas had a shortage. The lights did not go out, but they were within 3% of their planned reserves or their operating reserves. And at a certain point yesterday, prices were at $9,000 a megawatt hour for battery storage. So it's rates are a complex portion of this. And the generation side, I think Dennis is doing a lot to control the procurement cost. The other side of rates are the non-bypassable charges, and that's kind of what I want to focus on a little bit. And these non-bypassable charges are components of the bill that can't be passed, and they can't be alleviated through other charges. I mean, they make up really good things. Non-bypassable charges include a lot of our public benefit funds, and this will tie into another position we're going to talk about, which is to the extent that our customers are paying those non-bypassable charges, we should be collecting those funds and administering them with local control for local needs so that we can really tailor those programs to what our communities need. The other component of the real position here that we would want to advocate is that we want future non-bypassable charges, to the extent that the CPUC is going to include them, to be really transparent. We want it to be clear. It shouldn't be a mystery as to what these charges are and how they're being communicated and calculated. For example, the PCIA, which we heard about earlier, and its impact to the customers, because the customers are the ones paying it. It's a complicated thing. It takes a year and a half to be calculated. There are workshops that go on forever. So transparency in how these things are being calculated is at the forefront of what we're looking at. Other affordable competitive rates policies that we would advocate is protecting the ability of customers to migrate. And that, again, is a complicated issue. So protecting customer indifference so that they can move between service providers has to be in connection with, to the extent that there are barriers to doing that, eliminating those barriers. And keeping in mind that to the extent that DA is expanding and our customers would be able to migrate, that we too would need to be procuring with a mind towards the fact that customer load could depart, whether it's going back to the IOUs or otherwise, but trying to keep it clear, trying to reduce barriers to customers being able to choose, and then keeping all of this very clear, simplified, and understandable rate structures so that there can be understandable comparisons by customers. Local control. We obviously are governed by our operations and our policy boards. They're duly elected or representatives. of duly elected agencies. And we want to protect the independent procurement, the operational decision-making of those boards, except as specifically called out by the CPUC. And those two areas are with respect to the RPS program, the renewable portfolio planning that we do, so how we're buying to make sure that we're meeting our state targets. Not what we're buying, but how we're planning. And then the IRP, the integrated resources planning that we do, and the CPUC certifies. And if a bill goes forward as planned into next year, the CPUC will ensure that those plans are actually working towards meeting state goals. Sorry, I just want to catch where I was here. So the policy positions, again, would be to protect the board authority, and I think, again, being solution-oriented, helping define complementary roles for other agencies. So the CPUC, CalISO, the California Energy Commission, defining how these organizations are going to work, what their role is with respect to ours. This is something that we're dealing with on a daily basis, but a good example is there's a projected shortage. There's a lot of debate over how severe it is, when it will be, but there's a projected RA shortage coming in a few years and how people are going to deal with that. And the CPUC has taken a position that they've put out some ideas they want load servicing entities to respond to. And as part of our response that Mr. Keene has really been heading up on behalf of Monterey Bay Community Power, it's been treating that information from the CPUC as informational. And then our reaction to that really defines our role with respect to the CPUC. How proactive are we going to be about that? Do we agree with them? Let's analyze that. Let's determine what the real shortage is. And then what is our cure plan? Being proactive and ahead of the CPUC so that you don't have a jurisdictional question that comes up about, whether or not there's an order to procure. Other areas that this comes up in really defining those relationships are going to be, as we go forward in the regulatory space, trying to define how some of these, whether it's central buy or some of these bigger picture ideas that the regulatory and the legislature are both dealing with. So we've got to really map how those agencies are going to play with one another. Looking at the development of regional programs, and as I sit here and I've heard the discussion tonight, really I think what the issue is that we support programs that are going to provide equal access to education resources and support services and financial incentives that help transition our communities to clean electric power. So making sure that people are aware of their resources that are available to them and providing those resources so that we can make that transition to clean electric power. And I think rather than kind of identifying particular programs or others, I think that high level is we're going to advocate for programs that allow us to do that. We're going to advocate for control of public purpose funds. We're going to advocate for the opportunity or the ability to fund and roll out the distributed energy resources that we talked a lot about earlier. And then I think other areas that are important are going to be those REACH codes that we've talked about, allowing local governments and encouraging local governments really to incentivize and to help increase the demand and the push for electrification of our built environment. Another issue, and I talked a moment ago a little bit about this, which is grid reliability. So this is one of the core issues that the JPA identified in its purposes. They want to promote grid reliability, and it's really key at this point where electricity demand is increasing. The number of resources that everyone is moving towards in terms of varied resources, solar, wind, solar and storage, geothermal, whatever it may be, all of these resources have things that make them very attractive, and then they all have things that make them potentially unreliable. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and what do you do in those interim periods? And right now, battery storage is probably the best solution to that. The problem is that the technology and the expense hasn't gotten to a point where we'll be able to satisfy the demand for those nighttime hours. So battery storage, while we like to call it storage, batteries are really a demand. So not only are you kind of limited in their capacity, normally looking at a 4-hour run, but you've got to be able to also charge that during your solar period. So if you are in a period where there isn't a lot of sun, not only are you limited in your battery rollout, but also in charging those batteries for future rollout. So this is a point of needing to make sure that we're being proactive and kind of cost effective in looking at the resources that help us maintain grid reliability and stability within the grid. Some of the issues that we would be looking at would be promoting cost-effective energy storage, and that's largely right now that's batteries, but other technologies might be there, but helping those technologies get better as well. But that's probably the primary one, and I think Tom said that earlier. The next would be promoting distributed energy resources and the integration of those resources into the grid. So you're looking at potentially in some areas grid investments and infrastructure upgrades to be able to do that. So infrastructure enhancements would be a component of that. And then also looking at very purposefully traditional generation resources that would be low or zero emission as a bridge. So specifically as a bridge, to the extent that these resources would be used for RA, and when Dennis was here earlier, he talked about resource adequacy, RA being that insurance policy. So to the extent they're doing that, they would be structured with a contract that make them a no-run facility. They're there just for the opportunity that they would be a shortage and come on. Now it's an expensive contract that keeps them there, staffed, ready to go. But the idea is you structure it such that they're not anticipating energy takeoff. Another component of that would be trying to encourage generation facilities that are non-fossil fuel, getting obviously away from diesel or coal. One of the things right now when we're talking about moving 100% renewable and zero carbon, in order to get that grid reliability, we're forced to rely a little bit on system power. And system power, as we talked about, I think a year ago, there's not green ions and brown ions, electrons, floating around on the grid. So it's hard for us to determine, and this is a conversation we've been having with some of the environmental advocates, it's hard for us to determine what the true impact is when we have to rely on grid power or system power for that RA component or getting through the night or whatever it may be. So in order to get there smartly and really bring down greenhouse gases, because again, that's the goal. The way to do it is to look at generation resources and try to structure them such that they have a planned obsolescence. They have a 2-cycle life system. So it's going to be a high efficiency natural gas high-efficiency natural gas facility that will move to just being a peaker facility, or a peaker facility that will move to just having a contract for standby operations. So again, being smart about it, and the priority would be moving battery technology and storage technology, looking at distributed energy resources, and then in terms of this other component, and the drawback is if you invest in these things, if you tell a natural gas facility that's built now, or if you want to build one, that's expensive. And the concern is they have long life cycles before they can make back their money. So the way you do that so that they're not running, so that you're not relying on those fuels, is to structure their contracts in such a way to get away from that, or to ensure that they have a planned obsolescence. And we can talk a lot about all of the different types of generation resources that are out there, but again, these policy issues and the positions that are being advocated are really ones that have to work in concert with each other. Again, our priority is greenhouse gas reduction, so that's our first structure, but it needs to be in consideration of the grid reliability concerns that we're all facing to really protect that future of zero carbon. The last aspect of the policy and procedures is how the procedures will work, and that is that once approved, once given the guidelines by the policy board, we'll be authorized to advocate within the parameters of that general advocated policy. And to the extent that the authority needs to give a specific position on a specific issue, that we'll take that to the executive committee of the policy board and refer to the full policy board. And every time that timing permits, keeping in mind that things move quickly, every time that timing permits, we would walk that first through the council here and the operations board to the extent that we can. And then in-person advocacy, whether with state representatives or otherwise, will be done by MPC staff and the board, the policy board of directors staff, and that we'll monitor and update the boards monthly, as we do as part of the CEO report, and then as needed for critical issues, either through confidential memos or updates separate from our CEO report. So in very brief overview, that is the structure that we've looked at. I do welcome all of the comments and feedback so that we can really shape this in a way before we take it forward.
So let me do this. Very good. Lots of detail and information around what the criteria
Chair,
is
if you
and
could
the
speak into the
procedure.
mic, please.
Thank you. Very good presentation. A lot of information in there. In an effort to respond to Mr. Osmer's recommendation, and I'm not inclined to take things off the agenda once they're there. I want to make sure you hear what they are. You can tell you need to come prepared for these meetings if you're going to try and make a decision on some of these things. Let's do this first. I see a number of hands that went up. Let's just before you reveal whether or not you've got problems or concerns, or any clarifying questions from our presenter, and let's see if we can. Are there any others? Just these two? Let's see if we can just clarify that and then make a decision as to whether or not we're going to try and get around to hearing everybody's concerns and comments, or if we should indeed postpone. Mr. Kimball.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. That was an amazing articulation of, I think, vast array of different policy positions. I think when we go to change the name to add Central Coast in there, we can add all of these to the basic charter and do some really good work in establishing that. Two questions that came up for me that I was curious about on the very first slide. You mentioned electric power and other forms of power. Curious what other kinds of power we're anticipating providing or procuring. And then the second one was maybe related to the indifference policy point. Would we go so far as advocating in public spheres for the complete abandonment of procurement by the IOUs? I know that they're already contemplating it on their end, but is it something that we would push and advocate for?
Let me start with your second question, because your first question, I'm going to ask you to direct me to it quickly. But on the second question, we've not had to advocate for that. I think that's the direction that the IOUs are going independently. I think there are, we've looked at PG&E always as a partner. They're our billing agent. They do a lot of things in terms of the metering, the delivery. They're a necessary entity to what we do. I think if, certainly if there's, it wouldn't be within the guidelines that are laid out here to move to a policy position to move them away from that. I think that there are some entities that are looking for the IOUs to move away from procurement, and as Tom mentioned earlier, I think San Diego Gas and Electric is already voiced that, and there's a lot of competing plans currently regarding PG&E and how they look. So we haven't looked there yet. We haven't laid it out as part of our policy here, but you know, we make up, I think, 97% of the load here in our service territory. If PG&E backed away from procurement for that additional 3%, that's a capacity that we would welcome as part of our customer base and that we would be able to handle.
But not ready to jump all the way to telling them they should. You've
Just
answered the
just
question.
to
So
add,
the answer is no. It's not part of the policy at this point. So
generally, just to add, we're advocating for stopping the CPUC from having the investor-owned utilities buy energy or capacity, and then spread the cost of it to all customers, including ours.
Mhm.
So we're not advocating that they stop buying, but we advocated that they stop buying on our behalf.
Okay, and I think the second question was, was there something in addition to electrical power? that
Yeah,
you're
and I was
talking
just, the reference you were
What's your
looking at.
second slide?
about? Extraterrestrial power.
Get back there.
Top right, next one. So
this-
electric power and other forms of energy.
So this is from the JPA. We would probably have to ask the drafters of the JPA.
Okay.
These are the foundations from them. I agree, there are a lot of areas in the JPA that we'll probably be revisiting in
Gotcha.
future.
Let's just clarifying question, Dr. Bueno de Bosque.
Thank you, Robert. That was great. I guess with resilience and the greater catchment area comes a lot of responsibility. And I don't know what our purview is with regards to hacking. Like, who's responsible for protecting any information, delivery of energy? I don't know if that's something that we've been thinking about. It just with your whole, talk, resilience was a big component for me, and then the responsibility of resilience, considering the larger catchment area, and with modern day kind of hacking, how are we protecting ourselves?
I think we do have a policy that deals with hacking into customer information. I think what you referring to is how can we prevent people from hacking into our bank and stealing our money?
No, I think on many levels, banking, private information, but also delivery of energy. Is that the responsibility of PG&E? And if it is, then are we helping them with that, or is that our responsibility? So on multiple fronts, but I think delivery and who could anyone ever shut our energy down through a hack or delivery of energy, stuff like that.
Other than PG&E, I think the real answer there is that responsibility falls on a lot of entities kind of between generation and delivery, which includes transmission and other things. So your balancing authority has a lot of responsibilities over that. It doesn't fall within Monterey Bay Community Power's purview.
Okay, but still, it's a clarifying question. The answer is no, it's not in there. So, but it could be. So what I'm trying to get at, as you can see, clarifying question. I just want to make sure we understand what he's got here and see if we want to continue on this on the agenda item today or move it to next month after you've all thought about this some more. So I'm looking for clarifying questions first. If there's no more there, go, Mr. Osmer, go.
Yeah. Well, I guess, that was a huge rapid fire summary, I guess, and it was extremely detailed. What are some of the things that you talked about that are not in the policy? I mean, we got a 6-page policy, and I think I heard 100 pages of positions,
Yeah.
I guess, so where are we, and is that where we want to go? Is that we want this to be an all-encompassing position paper, or is it a general policy that guides us in the next maybe 2 years? I mean, we're out to 2060 at this point.
Every position that I mentioned is actually in the policy, but the policy is intended to be this guiding 10,000-foot overview of what we might face in the legislative session. Every bill is going to be different. The positions on bills, the nuance in the bills, and really what it's intended to do is to give staff, to give Tom direction with respect to what is the will of the policy board, where do they want us to go, and to know how far we can go on advocating positions before we have to go back to the policy board and say, what do you want to do with respect to this bill?
So, do we really want to reduce barriers to migration? Is that in the policy at this point?
It is not, nothing is in the policy at this point. We're just discussing it. I think the issue there, and it's smart to touch on it, the issue there is what is competition? Is it good for us as CCAs to decrease barriers to movement of people and or movement of customer and customer load? And as part of that, I think there's the negative side, which is if you expand DA, then we are exposed to potential
Direct
customers.
access.
Direct access, you're exposed to customers potentially leaving. But the other component of that is encouraging customers to come to Monterey Bay Community Power because we believe that we can deliver power more effectively, cheaply, and cleaner than other load servicing entities. So as part of reducing barriers to migration is breaking down the PCIA, presenting the pass-through of these kind of legacy costs that PG&E and other IOUs have saddled their customers with.
Okay, migration to MBCP as opposed to back to, I think is what you said in your presentation. So, but that is in the draft. I wasn't able to find it because I can't work the find thing.
It should be on page 4 at 2C and 2D.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Stedman, I'll try this side of the room. Come back.
This is just really quick, and it probably follows under local control, but one thing I would say that you need to be an advocate for CCAs, and specifically Monterey Bay Community Power, since we know there's, kill bills authorized just about every year to do away with the work that's already been done. So that's establishing local control, but I think you should have a green light to attack that pretty specifically if such a bill were to come up.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Well, first of all, that was fantastic. I think that was above and beyond what we expected when we first talked about this at our last meeting, and I really, really appreciate that. I think this document has a lot of capacity to influence our future decisions and to very detailed get us to talk about the things we really believe in. Like, it really does sort of capture a lot of the spirit of why we're here in the first place that maybe we forget sometimes about what we're fighting for, what we're trying to build here. With regard to Chair Byron's question specifically of whether we should address this tonight or in future meetings, I think in light of Mr. Shaw's request that we chew on this and mull it over, and then we want that, and in light of the goal to bring it to the December policy board meeting, I think it would be best for us to sit on this and to offer our thoughts, to offer our changes on it, and to not vote on supporting this document and being done with it tonight.
Would you like to make that a motion?
I would like to motion to table this vote for at least until the next meeting.
Table
maybe?
this agenda item for decision till next month.
Yes.
So,
Just as council, not as staff presenting, I just want to caution, if that's the will of the council, we'll certainly move in that direction, but obviously as we adjourn, this item is one that keep your conversations to public here in your consideration of it. Avoid emails where you might have that danger of running up against the Brown Act. And then we'll, through the clerk, reach out to Mr. Capron, assuming that he would be here at the next meeting. He should listen to the debate that we've had so that he would be able to act on it as well.
yeah, and let's not tell him where it is in the agenda so he can find it after listening to 4 hours. Mr. Groot.
So
This is a discussion period after a first and a motion and a second.
I support the motion at this point because I think this is an important enough document that we need to really think through this and understand what we're reading here, and just reading it for a couple of days, I don't feel I have that level of capacity yet. I'm just asking if there's some way that we could provide you some feedback between now and our September meeting, so that maybe we could get some of those questions answered, or you could be more prepared for the discussion that we're going to have. And you mentioned Brown Act. I want to make sure that we don't violate that, but can we at least have some way of formally feedback information so that we can provide that to you?
Yeah. What I would encourage is if you want to prepare comments in advance of the next meeting, that you prepare them and submit them by email to the clerk, and then we'll take those emails and those comments and make them part of the continued agenda items so that they're all available to the public and a continued part of this discussion.
Can he call you or send you an email with a question?
Yes. It will become part of the public record. Sending it to me is a unique situation where I am, in addition to staff, presenting on this council, and typically avoid situations where our communications would become public so that there's never any question about whether or not I'm serving in what capacity. So my preference is that you send it to the clerk just to help protect that attorney-client need.
Let me make it easy. You can send it to me if you have a question between now and then.
There we go. Okay, so barring any other discussion, Mr. Stedman.
Well, I just wonder, here we are sort of kicking the can down the road again, and we already know that our agendas are pretty full. And this reminds me of something we did early on where we kept on bringing something back to this body when we could have directed the director of staff to make certain changes. I'm not sure to what extent we need to understand everything word by word. We just had the 50,000 view. I think there were no surprises there. I think it was actually very positive and encouraging, and I think it's an excellent framework. And like everything we do here, we can modify it as we go along. I mean, this does not carve it in stone and cast it in some kind of crazy metal. It's always dynamic. So if there were something that came up that we haven't foreseen, we could always bring that up and have the policy amended appropriately. So I'm just thinking of our time. We keep loading ourselves up with stuff, and we haven't even gotten to the difficult agenda item yet. Talking,
Save those to the end.
yeah. So just that's food for thought.
Well, and I don't see this as kicking it down the road. I'm sorry. I think for my organization, we take a year to develop our public advocacy policy. Every year, we have a step-by-step process that we go through to make sure that everyone's on board and that everyone understands what we're doing. And I feel this is so important for us as an organization that we need to take our time and make sure we have every word, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted the way we want them. And so I wasn't coming into this meeting tonight thinking that we were going to rush through this. I don't want to do that. I think 1 month's time is not kicking it down the road, in my opinion.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. I have to open to public comment.
Yeah, under discussion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Osmer, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think there may be some things missing. I mean, and I think it's very, I think it's a big issue. Everything that we have done, everything that MBCP is focused on is around carbon reduction, almost to the exclusion of everything else. I think there's a community aspect of this that isn't included in the policy and that we need to address. I think that it is somewhat in that, as far as I read it, we're suggesting that we take over some of the more social programs of Care, Fair, and Baseline through the public purpose funds use. But we've never really talked about that, and it isn't part of any of the greater framework. And I think we have to acknowledge clearly at some point that health and safety, economic vitality are things that are maybe not as equally important as carbon reduction, but certainly part of how we're supposed to work in the community and how the community expects us to work. So that's it for me.
Excellent.
Don't have to hear it the next time.
Okay, I'm going to go to public comments. Is there any public comment on this item only? Okay, I'll add a comment just before we go here. I think it is well written, and I was ready to support this. However, we do have time, and I defer to those who wish to provide additional thought and input to this. So I'm going to certainly support the motion. But at the same time, Mr. Shaw, I thank you for the responsiveness of this. This is a document that this committee will be producing and sending off to the committee. So that's my prerogative, just making a last comment. Let's go ahead and do the vote. Roll call, please. For the motion to table this item to the next meeting.
Bueno del Begat.
Aye.
Thank you. Can't even talk anymore. Kimball. Osmer.
Yes.
Wolfram.
Aye.
Almaskita. Stedman. Groot.
Yes.
Bezira Wist.
Aye.
Capron is absent. O'Rourke.
Aye.
Vice Chair Levon.
Aye.
Chair Byron.
Aye. Mr. O'Rourke?
So I have a quick clarifying question for Mr. Shaw, the council, not the staff member. This document, as it hasn't been adopted yet, would we be allowed to share it with constituents and receive their input on it?
It is a public document. It's been advertised. It is in draft form, certainly.
Yeah, good. We should give him the Brown Act training, shouldn't we?
I just took it.
Oh, good.
And the answer is always to ask your council.
Huh. Okay, good. Item 10, and this is maybe a time-consuming item. However, I hope not, and I'll explain why. This is a consideration to take appropriate action regarding a proposal to maintain or amend our regularly scheduled meetings, both dates and times. And the two primary issues here, if you've read the material on this, I put a memo out to you right after our, shortly after our June meeting, realizing that we were going to be following the operations board meeting this coming month. And I know how troubling that is because we want to see material before it goes to the operations board. And the other, of course, was the tremendous impact that we have on those sitting around this table and those sitting behind staff and public and the staff. So I'd like to break this down into really just three parts. I'd like to propose that we consider moving our meeting forward a couple of hours, and perhaps we would take a short break for dinner at 2 hours, and then we'd meet again if necessary following that. That's to try and mitigate that problem. The second is the one I mentioned just a little bit earlier, and that is the Operations Board meets the first week of the month. The Policy Board typically, when they meet, is the second week of the month, and here we are the third week of the month. So we're trying to get in front of that by moving ours forward, and what I've proposed is that we meet the first week of the month. So having said that, we've really only thrown out the idea of doing these dates for October, November, and December. So I'd like to address those two in order. And then there's a third one that I think we may want to discuss, and that is whether or not we want to put the September meeting in the mix of this discussion as well. So I hope you'll understand, I'm foreshortening the introduction of this, but hopefully you've read the information. This is my reading of the interest of the committee, the staff, and in the best interest of the public to move our meetings up. Now I realize that could be a problem for some of you to move a meeting to 4 o'clock. So I'd like to address that topic first, if that's doable, and then the second topic would be when we would have these meetings, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the first week of each month. And then the third topic we'll address would be September, to see if we can change that date. But I'm a little concerned about that. Mr. Groot, you have a question?
Well, I was just going to follow up on your first question about
Please.
moving the meeting earlier, and I do not have a problem with that, so I will support that if the rest of the group wants to do it.
I'm not going to do it as separate motions.
But
We're
I'm not doing a motion.
Okay.
I'm just making a comment because you asked for our comments.
Yes, thank you.
And I think there's another element that we need to discuss here too, is whether or not staff can handle 2 major meetings the first week of the month.
Mr. Habashi?
I think that, and I think you are specifically talking about the months where the policy board meets, not where the operations board meet. And it is, we can handle, obviously we are handling 2 meetings here, one yesterday and one today. It is not that, I mean, it's a little bit of a burden, but it certainly could be done. If you would to not have the meetings back to back like Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday and Thursday, if you move the meeting to Monday, maybe then we can do it. Another option, if you will, that for the months where the policy board meets on the first week, and the operations board doesn't meet at all, maybe for that month or for those months, the 4 months where the policy board meets, you can have your meetings on a second week following the policy board.
Okay, so let's do this. If there's not any more questions about how I would like to try and get through this as quickly as possible, can we just go around the room and answer the initial question, does a 4 o'clock meeting work for you? On most days. May not work on some, but we're trying to get a general consensus. Background. We went with 6 because that was, you all have day jobs, and we were trying to stay away from those. But the evening meetings are just going too long. It's a real burden on the staff. It's difficult for the public, so that's why we're moving these forward. Is it possible, Mr. Amisqueda, if you can do 4 o'clock meetings? Yeah. Okay. I'm just keeping track of this as we go here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, as long as they don't go to 10 as well.
No guarantees, Mr. Stedman. Solan?
I say yes, with the thought that I would recommend possibly moving the public comment that is not attached to an agenda item to the end, so that folks that may want to comment on things that are not on the agenda, that just want to provide public comment, don't have to take off work to be able to do so.
Gotcha. And that's a good idea. I thought that
I
might
don't
be.
know if that's possible, but
I think it's very possible we could put a public comment on the front and the back of our agendas. Okay. Mr. Kimball?
Yes, especially if we open this up to video call.
Okay. Doctor?
Yes.
I was concerned that with your schedule that it might be a problem, so I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Osmer?
I'm in management, so I don't have a real job, so it's no problem for me.
Spoken like a true director.
Mr. O'Rourke?
Yes.
Ms. Wist?
Yes, however, I will be not present in the next meeting. I
Yeah,
will
we're-
be in Brazil.
Yeah, as you'll see, I'm going to have some difficulties too, as your
Yeah.
chair. So I'm just trying to address this in a systematic way. So I would like to propose then we go to the second item, knowing that we have pretty good consensus that a 4 o'clock meeting will work. I have tried to solicit input to some of you, and the public will have an opportunity, although at this late hour I'm not sure how much we'll get, as to how this might affect the public. Ms. Levan obviously brought that up in her comment. We want to make sure the public still is engaged in our meetings. But, you know, the operations board and the policy boards meet during the day, and that's not been a problem, nor I can't say it's not been a consideration, but let's just say those folks don't give up their evenings. And so I think we're inclined to go forward with the sense that the public will still be able to engage in our meetings. They certainly can't engage as well after 10 o'clock as they probably could at 4. Yes, Mr. Stedman.
I just like to say that my advisory committee meets at lunchtime,
Mm.
and so that's also
And how long are
available.
their meetings? Uh-huh.
Not as long as these.
Okay. So what I'd like to do now is if you'll go to, I don't think there's a slide on this. If there is, that shows the dates we've proposed. Is there? Okay. So we could do this a couple of different ways. I guess in general, what I'd like to see, let me do this. As you can tell, I've only looked at October, November, and December. But we're talking about trying to get something that's relatively consistent into 2020 as well. So just in general, does the first week of the month work for moving our third weeks forward into first weeks? I know that there are some constraints on individuals, but does that make a difference to anybody if it's first week or third week? Now, I'm hoping that just, you know, if it is, then that's fine. If it isn't, let's hear about it.
No, that's actually great for me.
I don't need to hear that.
Yeah, clarifying question though is the preceding week of the first week, which would be the fourth week of the previous month, I know that gets complicated to make the transition to it, but we would be meeting the week prior to those meetings, so we keep them 1 week apart.
I think it's actually, you'll see it's going to be 3 weeks, but we can look at a specific calendar.
Sounds
But
good.
I think the fastest one comes up in with about 3 weeks. So, having said that, are there any days of the week in that first week that are problematic for individuals? In other words, is there dates we should be taken off the list? And Mr. Habashi has added in the Mondays, if you'll have noticed, because we forget about Mondays. Mondays are a good day oftentimes to meet. So that gives us another option, and that's acceptable, right, Mr. Habashi? Monday nights maybe even be preferred by you and your staff.
Yeah, like Councilman Osmer, I'm in management. Any day is good for me. Yeah, you just name it.
Well, and I noticed you didn't put the weekends on here. We have those dates available to us,
Yeah,
too.
pick that too. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm asking for a negative. Are there any days of the week that are problematic on a consistent basis, first week of the month? Mr. Stedman?
Well, I thought I was in management, but I have conflicts on Tuesday and Thursdays.
On every Tuesday, Thursday, first week of the month. That's taken out a big chunk right there.
Well, if that happens, it happens. It's
I can say that at least for us, Monday seems to be consistently a good day, at least for me. I know for my staff as well.
Okay, I'm sorry, I want to capture that. Ms. Levon, Monday is a problem, consistently.
Consistently, I can do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
All right, we're just taking out that, we're just looking for exclusions at this point. Mr. O'Rourke?
I'd like to point out the letter from Councilmember Capron in which he notes that the first Wednesday and the first Thursday of every month is a problem for him.
Wednesday and Thursday for Mr. Capron.
Yeah.
Okay, great, guys. We've taken everyone out now, right?
Add another vote against Tuesday, please.
Yeah, these are the problems I knew that we would come up against in trying to change our dates. Okay, any other exclusion dates? I'm just asking exclusion days of the week in general terms, okay? Realizing, because I can tell you, I'm not going to be able to make some of these dates through the rest of the year. And next year, no problem for me, but through the rest of the year, it's going to be problematic. Okay, so I have exclusion on Tuesdays for Stedman Kimball, Wednesday Capron, Thursday Stedman Capron, and Monday Levan. Okay, is that correct? Okay, no disagreement on that. Okay. So the two dates that have the least impact then are Wednesday and Monday. That's not good. Anybody have any other suggestions?
Coin flip.
Does it have to be the first week or the second? Is that
It's the only fair way to do
Well,
it.
we might as well keep it the third. What we're trying to do is accomplish it here is to get ahead of ops and policy.
When is ops?
The operations board meets on the second Wednesday of the month.
Mhm. So then that would be the second Tuesday of the month would be the only day, and that would be back-to-back consecutive days. Does that make sense? We could
Yeah.
only meet.
And then policy is only 4 times a year?
Yeah, the idea is that at a minimum to meet 1 week before the operations board, because if you meet 1 day before the operations board, then whatever input that you give is not gonna make it for the next day meeting.
Well, our meetings will be over earlier, Mr. Habashi. There is more time in the evening.
Remember, we get the packet to the operations board 3 days ahead, so.
Mr. O'Rourke, you want to add something?
The policy board, when do they meet? Every 4 times a year? And
Yeah.
Which day of the week do they meet?
They're the third Wednesday.
The first Wednesday,
First
first Wednesday 4 times.
So we're not going to beat them all the time, but typically it's going to go to the operations board before it gets to policy, and policy is going to be meeting
Yes.
Oh, every 3 months.
Hey, so
Doctor,
time is relative, as Einstein said. And I don't understand, because what we're talking about is information prior to the Policy and Operations Board getting it, right? So why don't we just get it before them when we get it, the month before? Like what?
can you be more clear on what your question is?
So what we want to do is get ahead of the curve, right? Yes or no?
The interest of the council is to see information
Yes.
and have an opportunity to input
Under-
before it goes to the next board.
Exactly, exactly. It doesn't have to be within a calendar month, right?
Correct.
It can be the February, we get the information first, and then March, they get it. Like, that's not, I don't understand why it has to be limited to the same month.
So
Today, we could have gotten the information for their next meeting in
I think-
September.
Let me,
That's the only, if there's
I
a,
understand your point exactly,
Yeah.
and it's just that if we have an issue that we need to get to the policy board, in order for us to kind of play the way you are suggesting, then we're gonna have to start thinking about it and preparing for it 3 months ahead of time, so we can get it to you first, wait a month to get it to the operations board, wait another month at least to get it to the policy board, forcing us to actually go way back to make our preparation well ahead of the time that we're planning to take it to the policy board. Just a little bit of a more burden on the staff to try to get things done well ahead of time when they need to get it done by.
What about the last week?
right, yeah, that's,
What about the last week of the month?
The last week of the month, I think it would work. It will actually, it won't be too bad. It will give us 2 weeks ahead of the operations board and a good week before the policy board. So yeah, I would definitely support it.
Okay, we're not prepared on that one, so we're gonna have to do some hustling here if we're gonna try and make that a decision tonight. What do you all think about that, if we were to move to the last?
So that will pretty much preclude November and December, since that's right after the holidays, and I don't think we want to have a meeting the last week of December.
That's true, that's always the rub, is that you get, and so those tend to delay another week, if anything. Yeah, I think it would work at the beginning in January, but it's problematic for us here, as Mr. Groot said, in November and December.
One more thing, Bren just pointed out that if we pick Monday, we just need to keep in mind that some of the holidays do fall on Monday, so we,
Yeah.
Yeah, first Mondays of the month are often, yeah. Not always, that's right, okay.
If I can offer,
Please, we're looking for suggestions here. See if we can
Well,
hone in on an idea.
I don't know if this is a suggestion, it's more of a reminder. Our action that we're looking at is simply looking at the remaining dates for this calendar year. So whatever action would be taken here would be for the remainder of this calendar year, and it may be that that action helps inform the council as to any kind of permanent change that they would want to see in 2020 further. So I guess what I'm saying is you could look at the remaining calendar dates for this year as a trial run for prospective dates. As Councilmember Stedman mentioned earlier, these things aren't necessarily set in stone. But
So-
the action is just for the remaining dates.
So I agree, and I am trying to hone in on that, but I'm looking at the general concept first, because we'd really like to get way out in front of this so you all can plan around this agreed-to time, as you have really well for the last 12 months. I mean, we've had incredible attendance, and I don't want to lose that, okay? No, we have. We've had really good attendance. We could look at the last week of the month, in addition to the dates that we've got here. So that would be workable, as I understand it. Would still give us the notion of being in front of Operations Board when they meet the second week of the following month. Your comment. So that would work as well, correct?
with the fourth week, yes.
So that opens up more dates, but as Mr. Shaw points out, we're just trying to do it here for the next, I'm sorry, not the next 3 months, October, November, December, but I'm thinking in general, but that really doesn't address the problem of the certain days of the week that people have exclusions around, correct? Or were your exclusions only for this year?
that was preferred, but if necessary, I mean, I may have to miss 1 or 2 meetings, but
Mhm. Yeah, I think we all will.
Yep.
That's a given. And I don't want to miss any, but I'm going to miss some as well. Mr. O'Rourke?
And this is not to sound harsh at all, but this is like a public service board that we're a part of, and perhaps the meeting days for this might supersede the personal obligations of the members of that board in some instances, which means basically that it might just be tough for the next couple of months
I
to make it
understand that,
work.
fully understand that.
Yeah.
We have to make a decision. So, that it's very possible that the best thing we're gonna do here is stay on the 3rd week of the month. And that's why I didn't touch September, because that's just around the corner, and I figured the chances of trying to move that date, although Mr. Hibashi would like us to consider moving, and that was the 3rd thing I was going to try and get to tonight, like to ask us to consider to move to Tuesday, September 3, right? Move our September meeting up to September 3.
Quite frankly, at this point, whichever day you move to is fine with me.
All right.
I'm certainly open to it.
It worked out so well when we did this last year. We were able to come to an agreement on something. I'm a little bit perplexed here.
Can I say something, Chair
Like I said,
Byron?
the least 2 days appear right now to be Monday and Wednesday. Go right ahead.
It sounds like the 4th week is fine. Why is it because of the holiday? What about Tuesdays on the 4th week? How do people feel about that?
So you're talking about keeping it in the same week and moving to Tuesday. For what purpose?
No, of the week before, the 4th week.
So he's looking at October 29th, November
I'm sorry.
26th, and December 31st. I would probably miss December 31st, I'm gonna say.
And what's
But
the one in
I would be there
November?
for 26
What's-
and 29.
What's the Thursday in November?
It's the 26th.
Isn't that Thanksgiving? It is. Yeah.
Thursday, Tuesday.
So that's,
Tuesday, no, I don't think so.
oh, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
No,
There's
it's
no
the-
holidays on Monday, there's no holidays on Thursday.
Thanksgiving, I believe, is the 21st and the 22nd. So
Thanksgiving is the 28th.
Yeah,
Oh, it is? Oh,
Yep.
shit, yeah.
but that's not Tuesday, that's a Thursday.
Right, that's workable.
It's
And
It's
what was
Tuesday, the
what-
26th.
What's the October date?
29th.
So that would be the last Tuesday week of the month.
That would
Last
put us 1 week
Tuesday, last week of the
before
month.
operations, or well, 2 weeks before policy.
Well, my table that I have doesn't have enough room for all these possibilities. Just as general sense, those of you at the committee table here, at the council table, do those, last week of the month, Tuesday, do those dates sound workable? 10/29, 11/26, 12/29? Take a look.
29.
It's not 12/29.
No, it's 12/31.
It's 12/31.
And I would miss 12/31, I'm pretty sure. But I mean, I think last
think
year
we
we
all
all
would.
missed Thanksgiving.
Then let's
We
ignore that one
canceled
for
the
now.
Can I
November, didn't
suggest
we?
something? I've been around other monthly meetings that usually happen in the fourth week of the month, and usually that becomes an issue both with the Thanksgiving as well as Christmas. So maybe what we can do is, and the choice that most of the organizations that I worked with decided to do is to move to the December first week, or at the latest December second week, to make and do away with both meetings. So instead of having a November and a December meeting, fourth week, you move to the first week of December and call it a day.
I could do the 3rd. Or the 2nd if it was required.
So again, I'm looking for exclusions, okay? Because it's really difficult to keep, I hope there's all positives, but I'm
Yeah.
looking for exclusions. Is anyone excluded from the 10/29 or 11/26 idea? Take your time.
Depending on Thanksgiving plans, I can't be sure that I will be here on the 26th.
I thought the proposal was to skip those two and combine them into one for December, November. So it would
Just
be
I-
December 3rd.
No, that was
Sixth.
Mr. Hibashi. I'm just trying to get these two dates first to see if they're workable. If they are, we're gonna go with these.
Yeah, I can't guarantee the 26th either.
Mr. Shaw, this does need to be decided during a public meeting, correct?
It does.
It's almost impossible to do it otherwise.
What the otherwise approach would be to ask the clerk to send a doodle poll so that everyone could respond to that, and you could take action at your September meeting for the remaining months of the year. The other constraint is that as crafted, the agenda item is really about maintaining or considering the chair's recommended actions as stated in his memo and expanded upon by the board. So we really are limited in the dates that are under consideration under the action as titled.
So we shouldn't be looking at these other dates?
Well, to the extent that the chair was discussing them in terms of the broader aspect, but in terms of the action that's taken, we're really limited under the agenda title to the dates that are referenced in the chair's memo and expanded in the staff's memorandum.
So I should have written my memo to include every date on the calendar for us to consider them. Is that right?
If that was the will of the chair to consider all dates on the calendar. Another approach is to have the clerk send a doodle poll. We'll get everyone's availability for the dates and the weeks in the future and bring it back.
And I'm not discounting that that's a possibility. I just didn't think it was workable because that's going to take us into September before we can make a decision on how we're going to address October, November, December.
We could move to change the September meeting and do the doodle poll for the remaining meetings. 2 motions.
All right. So we also can make a decision to not move these remaining meetings in the year because of the challenge that it represents to all of our calendars. I just wanted to be responsive to the council's interest and the needs of the staff to move the meeting date forward. It sounds like the first one has been addressed, so I'm very satisfied with that. That in fact, I may ask the question if we could even start that as early as our next meeting, unchanged in September, which I hadn't thought about because I'm just concentrating on seeing we get these dates. So, any other suggestions? I mean, we've got a lot of ideas to work here with. Are any of them something you think we can resolve tonight, or should we be postponing, as Mr. O'Rourke indicates, and try and do this with a doodle poll? Still going to be a difficult decision, but we'd be basically postponing it until next month.
How about we let Mr. Habashi assimilate all of the information that he's collected tonight and use his years of experience and wisdom to just send us meeting notices?
All right, but let's do it with a doodle poll, though. Let's give him the information so he has it all.
Well, I'm not sure doodle poll isn't a seriatim decision, but I'll
But,
defer to
isn't a what?
attorney.
I
No, I'm just kidding, just kidding.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's difficult to maintain a sense of humor at 10:30 at night. Mr. Groot.
So I'm just had the thought that, when we tried to put together a meeting date for our ad hoc committee, we had the worst time trying to find a date and a time in which we could all, just 4 of us, meet. So I'm going to make a motion that we stay with the 3rd Thursday of the month, moving our meetings to 4 p.m.
Okay, a motion's been made. Is there a second? Second. All right, so any discussion around the motion? Okay. I'll open it to public comment. None. All right, I'm going to call a vote, but I would also like to suggest that we still look at moving our dates to either the 4th or the 1st to try and get in front of these other boards, because I've heard that from many of you a number of times that that's a concern. So that's why I keep coming back to it, not because I have an interest in moving it. So I don't want to preclude that we will still look at that, and we will do that with a doodle poll. And we'll discuss how we can do that so we can put this on a future agenda item either in September or October so we can make a decision for 2020. So we have a first, second, no public comment, no one.
Comment.
And Ms. Levan wants to say something.
It just seems like trying to move the meeting at this point in time, especially with these 2 months of November and December when we have all these conflicting issues, is probably not the right time.
I didn't say it right. We're not going to move
Yeah.
it. We're
But
not going to
I'm
move
just
it.
saying this is something we should probably consider for 2020.
That's what I meant. If I didn't say it correctly, that's what I meant.
I would agree. At the end of the year, all the meetings you didn't make, being in management earlier in the year, they all get compressed into the final couple of months, it seems. So trying to find open time is a very difficult task indeed. So-
Can I also say that when we do revisit this for either hopefully the next meeting, so we can just work on that as well, that you include every day of next year?
That'll be a difficult matrix.
Doodle.
That's a 12 by 365 well, yeah,
Just to cover.
I got you. That way we can make sure we
Yeah.
meet with the Brown Act requirements. Okay, motion is before us. The motion is to keep the same meeting dates and move our meeting start time to 4 p.m.
Starting in September?
Beginning in September? Yes. And just want to check one thing. That's workable, correct, for September? Should
Yes.
be. Okay. So I think I'll try a voice call on this. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you all for entertaining the discussion on this. Again, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm really trying to meet the interests. Did you want to say something,
Can I
Doctor?
make a motion?
Another motion. Go
Is that
ahead.
Okay. Can we deal with this next meeting for 2020?
Right now?
No. Next meeting, could we just talk about if we want to move it up, the next meeting for 2020, if that's okay?
Okay.
That would not be a motion that we'll
Oh,
be
sorry.
looking for action on, but if you're requesting that we bring that forward
sorry.
at the next agenda,
Just so we can
It's the
get
will
that
of
out
the
of,
chair.
like,
May I do this? I'm going to work with we will work with Mr. Habashi on getting it on the next agenda and trying to solicit sufficient information from all of you so that we
Perfect.
may
Yeah.
be able to make a decision on that in September. I think the reason we should try September is it might get pushed again to October, but we're going to have to make a call on this at some point. Either that or we're going to just leave it where it is. Okay? So we will agendize it. That's not a word, is it? You can't agendize something. Yes.
So I think that it is important that we do meet prior to the policy and operations boards, that we can have a voice that has an impact. So I'm okay that, we've already made a decision for this year, but if we can just make it a part of the agenda sooner rather than later, so we can just check that box and know that we are, just to make that, like, we all look at our schedules this month. You guys can email us directly, I think, right?
Doubt it.
No?
We will have the clerk
The
handle
clerk,
this.
sorry, the clerk do that, or the doodle poll with the clerk for 2020.
Thank you for endorsement on that. I'm adding your name to the list of many whom I've heard from on that issue.
Okay.
All right. So I'm moving on to item 11, and this is the selection of chair and vice chair. We're late on this item, as Mr. Habashi explains in his staff report. You may recall last year when we were elected as chair and vice chair, I proposed that we revisit this in a year. It's my understanding that both Ops and Policy Board do 2-year rotating positions on this, and it's in our bylaws that we'll do it annually. So we're going to be a month late, primarily because we did not meet in July this year. I should tell you, I've enjoyed being your chair. I would like to continue. However, I found the voting process last year very uncomfortable. And you'll see here it either says we do a floor vote or an appointment. And I would like to do an appointment of a 3-member ad hoc committee that would present nominations for next month at that meeting. And we would do that at the beginning of the meeting, if I recall. That would be one of the first items of business, to vote for chair and vice chair. And it would be the requirements, not the requirements, it would be the responsibility of the nominating committee to identify one or more candidates for each of those positions. I would like to ask if there was no one interested in either of those two positions, if they would like to volunteer to be part of the nominating committee. Does that make sense? Of course, option one is here as well, but I'd like to do option two, if there's no objection. Anyone want to volunteer nominating committee? Mr. Abashi, would you explain maybe, because you've been through this many times with the ops and at least a couple of times already with ops and policy board, how the nominating committee works? Nominating ad hoc committee.
Yeah, generally, you'll have 2 or 3 people that will get together and talk about who would they like to nominate to the chair and the vice chair. It's usually one person per, not a number of them. And they connect with these 2 individuals and ask them if they wanted to serve. And if they get a yes, then they bring the nomination to the floor the following meeting. I think that's pretty standard.
Well, I've already made it clear I'm interested in doing this again, but there may be others that wish to be included in that process, right? So there could be more than one.
I think if you do it that way, then you're in the first option, which is you nominate from the floor and you make your decision now. But if you'd rather do the nominating committee, generally they're not going to nominate several people for each position. They just nominate one person for the chair, one person for the vice chair. They bring the nomination to the floor, and if people agree, they agree. If they don't, they do something different.
I think I may have misunderstood that and was hoping that this would be deferred, essentially. So, Mr. Shaw, it sounds like we need to proceed if there's more than one, if there's multiple people that wish to be chair and vice chair.
That would be the typical approach. That's why you have the floor vote sort of approach to it. The concern that Tom was hitting on there is that once you have 3 people in a nominating committee and they start reaching out to multiple people to see if they're interested, you're starting to build consensus, and that could be a Brown Act issue.
So, how do we proceed?
I know that Bren helped with respect to last year, but I think the way that the process for a floor vote, if that's the will of the council, would be that people could express their interest, and we would take a vote on who those candidates are. But let me defer to Bren. I know that she's kind of thought about this process previously.
You're right.
Yeah.
Would just take a roll call vote.
So if we want to do a floor vote, then the people who are interested, we start with the chair. To be the chair, they say, yes, I'm interested. Then we do a vote, and then we go to the vice chair, do the same thing, and go on from there.
All right. So much for my approach.
Let's start with the chair.
So, do we say who?
So the chair is seeking nominees to be chair of this council.
Yeah, you can nominate yourself or nominate somebody else. I mean, that's the way it works.
Mr. Groot.
I will nominate Jeff Byron as chair.
Thank you.
I will second that.
Thank you. Any other nominees? See, this is the part that I find very uncomfortable. Thank you very much. Comment? Public comment. So, call for a vote. Do we do a roll call? Roll call vote, please.
Bueno de Bosque,
Aye.
Kimball,
Aye.
Osmer,
Aye.
Wolfram, Mosquito, Stedman, Groot,
Aye.
Bezira-Wist,
Aye.
absent, O'Rourke,
Aye.
Vice Chair Levon,
Aye.
and Chair Byron.
Well, in modesty, I will abstain, but I thank you very much for your votes. So that motion passes. Thank you very much. Now we'll entertain nominees for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Natalie.
Second.
I'll second.
Me too.
I think Mr. Osmer got the second in. He beat Mr. Groot by a moment. Okay, any discussion?
Any
I'm sorry, any others? You can nominate yourself.
Are you interested?
I mean, I'll do it.
Okay.
I'm also wanting, if somebody else wanted the opportunity, I want,
She-
to be able to have that opportunity. I'm not monopolizing this.
No, you're being very polite, much more than I was. All right, any public comment? Okay, let's do roll call vote, please.
Bueno de Bosque,
Aye.
Kimball,
Aye.
Osmer,
Aye.
Wolfram,
Aye.
Amosquita, Stedman, Groot,
Aye.
Bezerra-Wist,
Aye.
Capron is absent, O'Rourke,
Aye.
Vice Chair Levon,
I'll abstain.
and Chair Byron.
Aye. Well, I'm glad I'm not going to have to go through that again.
Hammer, man, hammer.
Thank you all very much for your endorsement. I know, speaking for myself, and I will reserve, Ms. Levon, I will certainly do my best to serve you again this next year, but I always look for feedback anytime from any of you, okay? Doctor?
We love you. And if we could just make it a little more shorter, precise,
Yeah, I really think,
succinct.
I think
Yes.
we'll make that the
Yeah.
responsibility of the vice chair
Hmm.
this next year. Maybe she'll do a better job.
Well, you saw the meeting I ran.
That's true. I watched it, and it was very quick. All right, we're on to item 12. This is informational items, and I think there's at least one report on this, so I'll turn to the vice chair first.
And I'm going to turn to Mr. Groot.
Sure. A real quick report on the ad hoc committee that was tasked with putting together the community event for the Salinas Valley area. And through a number of circumstances, we've run into some roadblocks with the site that we selected, which was the sports complex. And so we have decided to rethink the event itself and maybe reformat it and maybe shoot for something in November instead of the date in October that we had selected. But unfortunately, it didn't work out the way we thought it was going to work out with the sports complex. And so we'll meet again in the next couple of weeks. I believe we've set a date already, and we'll start working on that again. So it's still in process, but just to let everyone know, it's probably going to be postponed from the October date.
It's
Evolving, thank you.
So are we, so it's not going to be October 30th as originally planned?
It was actually October 12th.
I'm sorry, October 12th.
And it is not. So we are going to continue with our regularly scheduled October meeting in that case. Well, yes.
And so it's still open-ended then as to when that workshop would take place.
We need to meet with staff and make some more decisions.
Will it happen this year?
That is our wish, yes.
Okay. Any other, I always put this item on the agenda in the event that committee members have anything else they'd like to report or comments they wish to make, because I think this is always important. Mr. Osmer.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mr. Bashi and JR. JR and I were on a panel for a CPUC hearing on a proceeding regarding disconnections last month, and he raised some great points that got on the record, and I appreciate his involvement in that. Thank you. You'll pass it on to him.
Any others? I have a thought that I would just like to throw out, and of course it's very late, and this may not be appropriate, but you know, it's so difficult to get these dates, and we basically are casting aside a Saturday date, October 12th, and I'm wondering if it would be still useful to hold that date for maybe another purpose. Something that I've always thought that might be helpful or of interest to this council would be some sort of study session. And of course, it's not like we don't meet long enough, but an opportunity whereby we could get a presentation perhaps from other community advisory councils as to some of the activities they're involved with and doing. We rely upon staff for that information. They meet, I think you said bi-weekly? No, somebody said this earlier. They meet periodically with other staff and other CCAs. What if we were to do something similar where we asked a couple of other CCA chairmen of advisory councils to tell us what they're doing, best practices, and you know, I've heard this phrase too many times, and I don't like it. I don't agree with it necessarily, that we're seen as rubber stamp. We're getting the best information our staff's bringing to us. It's good information, but if you'd like to hear directly from how others are doing, this might be a way to do that. However, it's not the right thing to bring up at 11:15 at night on a Thursday. But
Just a
that
quick
date
comment
is,
on that.
that date is on everybody's calendar, and I'm just trying to ask,
think
should we
the-
hold it?
One of the challenges, in addition to the location, was the staff accessibility. They, because they've got the community fair happening in Monterey the month before, they're all working very hard on that, and then they're also working very hard on bringing on these new communities. And they kind of requested that we consider postponing this event because it was really taxing them.
I agree.
So-
I agree. However, what I'm suggesting takes very little staff time. The only two that might be involved are the two that are currently sitting at the seats and table right now, Mr. Hibashi and Lair, because I could see setting this up very easily on my own, if indeed it's something this council is interested in.
In terms, what I'm hearing is that you'd like to see something agendized to see if there could be a study session scheduled for October 12th.
We
at the
currently
next
have a
meeting.
date scheduled, October 12th. It's called a workshop. This would be turned into a study session.
Yep. My point just being that there can't be any action from the council on this item tonight. So if you want to have that discussion, it would be at an agendized item at the next
Perfect.
meeting.
Then let's hold that date on your calendars. Let's put it on the agenda and for discussion. And it's just an idea. I just hate to give up dates because, as you know, how hard we work to keep them. That having been said, any public comment on this topic? This is item 12, member reports and comments. Mr. Hibashi?
Chairman, I need to make a very quick comment about the October
Certainly.
12th. What got to me a couple of weeks ago, maybe actually more than 4 weeks ago, that this day has been already postponed, and the staff is.
So the date is gone?
From the staff's minds, and I think that was a reflection of what I believe the ad hoc committee decided on, that we don't want to do October 12th anymore, we need to do something else.
Well, that's
I'm
a
not
committee
saying-
decision. That's not a council decision.
I understand, but at least the staff is acting as if we're no longer going to have this meeting on October 12th. To the extent that you still want to keep it on and you feel that you can organize it on your own, working with the council, that is fine with me. I'll show up. But if you want us to do a whole bunch of work to make miss this thing happen, that probably will be a little a little difficult, given that the staff has already got a lineup of things to do between now and then.
I hear your concern, and I still would like to see this on the agenda for next week, because I saw some heads going up and down as a potential positive. If between now and then we determine it's not feasible because of either location, staff support, or whatever, then we know what the verdict will be. But for right now, I'd like to put it on the agenda. It may be an easy decision come the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay? Mr. Stedman?
Really quick, I'd like to thank staff and Mr. Bashi
Oh,
for these
heavens.
mugs. These are the nicest mugs that's
What?
like the most robust travel mug I've ever seen.
Yeah, thank you. We were.
They are. They're very nice.
They work either for water or hot or cold. Yeah.
And I apologize to the extent that I'm responsible for the length of tonight's meeting, but I'm going to chastise Mr. Hibashi, because he's the one that puts all this stuff and provides this wonderful staff giving us these presentations. But I'm going to chastise you on another item. There's a young lady that's sitting in the back that's new that you did not introduce to us. Would you please, very quickly, so we can
sorry.
welcome her?
Oh, of course. This is my new executive assistant. Would you stand up?
I'm not on the agenda.
She just started on Monday, and she's working in the office next door. and she's getting a lot of training now from Arceli, who's been in that position for a little while, and as well as Bryn. She's going to be backup for Bryn as well.
So thank you for that. Arceli, thank you for being here, both of you tonight. And welcome, Ms. Val.
I'm sorry, it's Heather Val.
Heather
I
Val.
forgot to mention the name.
The new gatekeeper from Mr. Habashi's office.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all very much. Mr. O'Rourke.
Sorry, one last thing.
That's all right. You're just incurring the wrath of your counsel.
I just want to say that while I missed you all deeply last month, I appreciated the time off because I was able to get engaged with that time. And she is very supportive of me taking the day.
Engaged to be married.
Yes, yes. No, not with a meeting to be married. She's very supportive of me taking the day off work, driving up to Monterey, going through these long meetings and coming back late. But I would like to go back and see her now. So we would receive the last public comments and then let's get out of here.
I think didn't I do public comment? I think I did. Thank you all. We're adjourned.